Capital One is our sponsor here at OSCON for a day of discussions about open source and why it is so important for new stack organizations everywhere. Capital One is at the forefront of this new open source world with several efforts such as the opening of its APIs and open sourcing core technology such as Hydrograph, its DevOps dashboard. Learn more about Capital One and its focus on developers at developer.capitalone.com. Hey, it's Alex Williams, the New Stack here at OSCON for day 2 of our coverage here. Today, we're talking about open source communities, the transformation that companies go through when adopting open source. And our guest today is Capital One, and Capital One is a sponsor for our show here. And I'm with William Ma. Hey, William.
Hey.
And Jared Smith, both of Capital One, and joining us as well is Michael Coté of Pivotal. And Michael, great to see you as always.
Yeah, good to see you as well.
Yes. And Michael,
I didn't even have to get on a plane.
You didn't. You just had to come to the wedding table, so to speak.
That's right.
Right. I'm not sure what that, I don't know why you would call a podcast a wedding table, but, I'll go with it.
Well, I was saying it's like being on a podcast is like being at a table at a wedding dinner. You just there's some people you may not know, and, you got to do something in between eating and drinking. So you just sit around and talk, and there's no pressure. It's easy.
Excellent.
But I think there's a good analogy there with open source as well. Isn't it about everybody coming to the table and having a conversation and making the conversation better by sharing?
Sure. And one person doing something embarrassing is bad memories of a lifetime. So everyone needs to
or good memories.
Or good memories.
It could be good.
Or
That's
hysterical
right.
memories.
That's right.
So we'll see what the memories are after this show. But William, you are here to talk about Hydrograph. And Hydrograph is not yet open source, but it is something you do plan to release. And I would love to just hear you talk about that, because Capital One already has a history of open sourcing its projects. So last year at OSCON, Capital One open source Hydrograph, which is your enterprise DevOps dashboard. At South by Southwest, we were there, and you opened up your APIs, right? Some APIs.
Right.
And now you guys are here talking about some of your new efforts. So that's kind of the context for what you guys are doing. So I guess the question is, what is Hydrograph and why are you open sourcing it?
Yeah, so Hydrograph, right?
What is Hydrograph and why are you open sourcing it? Excuse me.
Yeah, so Hydrograph is basically an ETL abstraction on top of creating Hadoop processes. And the reason why we created Hydrograph to start with is we needed to both bring our applications along with our new platform and with our people as well. So what Hydrograph exposes is basically a familiar ETL interface for our engineers who are very familiar with that interface. Helps us drive applications to basically production in an easier time to market fashion. And why we open source this is we believe this is a need in a lot of different organizations such as Capital One. And by open sourcing this, we can get contributions from other corporations or organizations that have similar interests and can help us build out this robust product.
So how had you historically done this before, before you developed this platform? It's a pretty laborious process to do ETL.
Yeah, so we didn't have any ETL interface sort of on this platform before Hydrograph. We tried some products out there just to evaluate them, and we figured through our evaluations that to fit into our architecture and our engineers and be able to deploy into our technology stack, it was easier for us to build a product that can be customized in our environment.
Okay, and so you began to develop in your own environment, and so how are you using it? Michael, you were asking this question, weren't you? You were asking about the data and how it's used?
I mean, it's always... especially since you guys aren't a vendor, right? Like, right. It allows you to have an answer to the question of what do you use it for, right? Like, what kind of data goes through it, and I like the idea of the ETL interface, like to get the data in and muck it around and do what ETL means, like that feels like the normal thing that people would be using. And then I assume you're kind of like optimizing underneath, like you're changing the engine underneath it,
right.
and then you don't have to do retraining to like use fancy new ways of doing things and figure out whatever MapReduce means. But it's always interesting to know what you're actually using that for, what the business, if you will, and what customers of Capital One, like how they benefit from that and what it does for them.
Right. So there's not a specific data that I would say this targets. I would say we actually run currently in Capital One, we push our card ops data through it. We have our bank folks that also use it, and there's no limitation on type of data other than we have certain sources that we can pull in from. So I would say Hydrograph targets mostly transformations within the Hadoop platform. Whereas some tools might do more of the extraction and loading, which we're not targeting too much here, because we are focusing on our Hadoop platform be able to process within.
So and I assume card ops is card operations, like all of the
From our credit card.
Yeah. Sort of like all the metrics about how that business is running, and like I'm just making up stuff, but like the time it takes to send a new card, or like whatever it may be, and if you don't have a way of like getting that data and transforming it into the right way you want, it might be kind of like opaque for managers, and they don't really have the right kind of data, and their dashboards are like 6 months old, and so you have a way of more quickly like giving them data they can do something with to kind of optimize how the business is running.
Yeah, and also because it's has a GUI user interface, so it makes it easy to see what's actually happening, and you have to look through lines and lines of code to see what's going on there.
Right, you have a lot less technical access to data, essentially. Correct. Which opens it up to a broader audience to look at it.
Yeah, I would say, in a sense, it's like self-documenting when you're creating the application.
Self-documenting. What do you mean by that?
Well, so it's a GUI tool, so once you're familiar with these components, so we have 27 components you can basically drag and drop currently. And once you're familiar with what each function, you can quickly look at the interface and see the whole data pipeline. So you can visualize, don't have to click into each block, you sort of know what's going on in each of them. Mm-hmm. And it's a quick way to debug as well, so you can modularize your code. We have these components, you just drag and drop and connect them. Mm-hmm. And you can quickly identify where, if an application fails, where it occurs.
And from my perspective, taking a little broader look at it, that's oftentimes the hardest part of writing ETL transforms is the debugging piece, and I think this is supposed to work and it's not working, and trying to backtrack and say, okay, where did that fail, and where along where along that pipeline did I mess up?
So is that why the visualization is?
That's why the visualization is key, because it's really easy to look and spot and say, oh, I forgot to do this piece, and
Yeah, so it's key for development and support. We can quickly create it, and we can also quickly see where the problems are.
So what is the technology stack? I mean, what is the technology? Tell us about the technology behind this, behind this platform.
Sure. So our target execution platform is Hadoop. On top of that, we are using Cascading. It's an open source Java library. So that is our engine, our back end. Our front end is basically it looks like Eclipse based plugin. It's built on RCP. Rich Client Platform. And how we bridge the two is that we generate XML from the interface, and in our engine we parse that XML, and then we basically chain together and recreate the cascading flow. And that's what we submit to Hadoop.
Why did you choose this? Why did you choose it? Why did you make these technology choices? What is it about cascading, for example?
Yeah, so cascading is I would say it's a pretty well-known, supported open source framework, and we evaluated. We actually wrote some, just custom cascading just to evaluate it, and we found that it was a great way to abstract on top of MapReduce. So instead of going all the way down to lowest level MapReduce, we found that cascading gave us this flexibility, and it was easier for us to bridge these two interfaces together, both the UI and the backend. So for the UI, we chose RCP just because we didn't want to build a full-fledged visual interface, and RCP had all the widgets we needed to pull in, so like text boxes, just the full package.
Drag and drop and the icons and the grids and those sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, that RCP's been pretty wealthy over more than a decade of having lots of drag and drop stuff. So that makes sense.
Yeah, and we found that doing it this way was pretty lightweight to deploy. I mean, we have a desktop-based application. All our engine is Java based, so those can be easily set as dependencies. And so it's pretty lightweight application to deploy within our infrastructure.
Was it the plan to open source this from the start?
Yeah, that's how we actually developed it.
Is that how you guys are developing a lot of technologies now?
A lot of our technology stack really is designed to either be open source from the beginning, or with the plan to eventually open source it if it makes sense. Obviously, there's some things we develop that we know are our secret sauce and aren't. But I would say the majority of our development, especially new projects that are started with the concept of should we open source this, and let's start it from the beginning to prep that for being open source.
So tell us how that starts. How do you guys approach these projects? If you're developing your infrastructure to be open source, how do you approach them? I guess you're pulling off you're drawing from open source communities all the time. Then that's one part of it.
Yeah. So I would say a big design choice we made was to modularize our concept. So I call it the engine. Right, that's one module. The other is our UI interface, and this third is our XML layer that bridges the gap. So those are very modulated applications. In fact, when we first started, we didn't have a UI. We had the engine, and we wrote XML to orchestrate it. And then we built this UI layer on top, and we had to do some refactoring the XML. And then they can be used separately. Like, I can change my front end to generate XML differently if I wanted to. I can, for example, I can create like a web-based application instead, and that generates XML, and I can use the same back-end engine.
Okay, great. So, Michael, I'm curious from your perspective, what is it that this rings? Well, what resonates with you? I mean, you go to DevOps days quite a bit. You're at Pivotal. You're dealing with customers all the time. You've had the background at 451, and back to your RedMonk days. I'm curious on what your perspectives are hearing from William about this and similar approaches.
Well, I mean, it sounds like what I encounter a lot of companies like yourselves doing is, rewriting their stack in a non-disruptive way. And so, like, there's a couple of things you mentioned, like we have, I don't know what role there is, but we have they're probably some sort of analyst or something like, some people who do the ETLing. And as you guys have mentioned several times, like, we didn't want to make their life difficult. So they have a similar feel of how they interact with this, and they don't have to overnight learn some new way of doing things. And yet we want to take advantage of new engines like Hadoop and things underneath it. So we need to figure out a way of basically bridging. There should be some people like to use the word heritage, but we've got all of our legacy stuff, or as I like to call it, the stuff that makes all the money. And we can't just burn that down. So we need to have a transition between these two things without falling behind. And I think that's a situation that I see many companies in. And you hear all sorts of trite little markety ways of putting it, like every company should be a software company and things like that. But I think it's more of like yourselves, most companies, definitely every large company and organization has to start getting much better at the way they do software. And you kind of exhibited reasoning through here's a good way of being good at software. We don't just have a vendor come in and dump down some new solution for it and force everyone to go through the 3-ring binder training. how could we set up a system that kind of takes advantage of new ways of doing stuff and isn't incredibly disruptive to the people side of things?
Right. I think I'm an electrical engineer from my college days, and there's a great analogy in the way that black and white television transitioned to color television without ruining the experience for all the people that still only had a black and white television. And it's really fascinating if you're into that sort of thing to figure out how they engineered that to work.
Yeah,
I never thought of it that way. That's an
or
interesting
like
one.
I'm sure something that like has certain of you guys like up at night is like transitioning to carbon chip. That's exciting, right?
Yeah, the technology landscape is going to change, but that doesn't mean that the people and the training and that sort of thing is as nimble and as quick to change.
And I think when one goes out and talks with large companies like this, figuring out how to transition is like one of their primary problems or challenges, or however you want to think about it. But it's one of the things
opportunities.
There you go. One of the things they have to deal with that a just like random startup doesn't have to deal with, right? Is like, I got all that stuff over there, and how do I can't ignore it. Like I need to transform it and transition it. And so that like, it's again, I mean, that's what I see a lot of large organizations facing nowadays is I can't like ignore that stuff over there anymore. Like I need to start updating it and making it run better and take advantage of new technologies without it being like crazy disruptive or kind of like its own island of innovation out there. Like it needs to become part of the core business. So that's like I reached all the way up to the clouds from like ETL. I don't know how I did that. I should be in marketing or something. But like that's those connections. That seems to be what drives a lot of technology adoption in large organizations nowadays.
So Jared, how do you guys work together?
So my office, the open source office at Capital One, really plays a supporting role. The best analogy I can use is think of us as air traffic control. We're not telling William or other developers or teams how to fly the plane, but we're giving them guidance on, okay, you probably want to be at this altitude. Oh, you look like you're coming in a little fast. Oh, don't stall there. Those sorts of things. We give guidance. We help set direction. We help support them, maintain the contacts within our other internal organizations like risk management and legal and those sorts of things to make sure that the process goes smoothly for launching an open source application. We also try to provide guidance on how to build a community around the software. It's one thing to say, hey, this is open source, and throw the code over the wall and walk off and leave. It's a completely different thing to put in place strategies for building a community, for valuing and recognizing outside contribution, for making sure there's good documentation in place, for making sure there's tutorials and those sorts of things that make it easier for people to become those users and then become the power users and then contributors and hopefully someday trusted contributors to the projects and even project leads.
So what are you looking for? What are the things that you're looking for to make sure that things are going all right? So the project is, is maturing in the way it should in the open source community.
The number one thing is open and transparent communication. That's absolutely key for any open source community. And I think we've all seen open source communities that do a good job of that, and we've seen communities where maybe there's a token effort, but there isn't that open and transparent communication. That's number one. Two is trying to, whether it's documentation or whether it's other methods to help save that institutional knowledge and then transfer it to the next generation of users. With some projects, that's a good wiki or a good set of documentation. With others, it's a good search history on their online chat, so that you can go back and somebody's asking a question. The next person that comes along and has that same question doesn't have to ask the same person and get the same response. That's kind of a self-service model for answering questions. There's other things you can do. Are you reaching out to Linux users groups or meetups, or how are you spreading the word? How are you marketing that project? And I know that oftentimes in the open source communities we don't do a good job of marketing, and marketing may not be the right word, but self-promotion of this is my project and this is why it's valuable to you and this is why you may want to use it or contribute back to it.
Or just narrating what you're doing.
That's a captain's log or something.
Yes.
Yeah. What's your captain's log approach at Pivotal, or just generally from what you've observed in the community? What are some good captain's logs that you've read out there?
I think and it's related to a question I was going to ask, but I think nowadays you have basically like doing things in GitHub, like that's like automates your captain's log, and I don't really like actually do real work like development anymore, so I don't know if any of this is true, but it seems to be the case that like what something like that does and other systems is it basically, as you were saying, it automates your self-promotion. Right? So like you have one centralized place where all the code and stuff is happening, and not only code, but you can have your websites and issue tracking and documentation. So you don't have a bunch of different places, or that sort of like tire fire that SourceForge became of like disorganizedness. So it removes the variability of where you pay attention. You go to one place. But then it's also like built into it is the idea of people want to follow what you're doing and be notified of things, and you can kind of hook into that better, which again is not really possible if you have like a very decentralized like version control thing everywhere. So, I mean, I think a lot of captain's logging is done through that. And then there's also like conferences like this, and OSCON is like the open source world is. I don't know what stage it's in, but it's in another stage of self-awareness where it talks about itself more, right? Like we're not crusading to destroy like the big money barons anymore in the open source world like we were originally. Like now we're more interested in like talking about what's going on. I shouldn't say we, but the open source world, is more interested in talking about what's going on and explaining things and being more technical in what they're doing. And so, but that gets to like a highly related, at least in my mind, a highly related thing is like, over the course of the last 20 so years of open sourceism, like getting, as we would say, enterprises involved has always been a bit of a letdown. It's not that enterprises have let us down. It's just like that dream hasn't been realized. And like in my own nook of the world of Captain Loggery, like there's like the Cloud Foundry Foundation. We have a surprising amount of like, to me at least, enterprises, like end users involved and who are part of the foundation. You see this a bit in Eclipse and other places. And so I wonder, as an enterprise, putting that in air quotes, like what would you want the open source world for you guys to like do more work with it? Like obviously you're already doing a lot of stuff, but it's sort of like vendors obviously want to be involved because that's our business. And I'm always curious like how we could drag enterprises in more and more to like do stuff openly.
I think we're starting to see more of that. I was commenting with some other folks. I remember 2, 3, 4 years ago at OSCON, you'd see the enterprises come along and they're saying, yeah, we're using some open source. We're not really vocal about it, but we are using some. And every once in a while we'll contribute something back. Now you see enterprises who are very vocal about, hey, we like open source, we're giving back to open source, we want to be involved in open source. It's not just token open source contributions to get a little publicity. It's doing the right thing for the right reason, and for me that's the most exciting piece about it. What I would like to see is more and more enterprises step up and contribute at some more of the base layers. I think one good example of that is some of the flaws we've seen in OpenSSL lately, because everybody was using it, but very few people were paying attention and contributing back and helping out there. There's lots of other examples we could look at that if you depend on a particular library or a particular piece of your software stack, go contribute back to that, and not necessarily money. Contribute time, contribute developer resources, contribute a space for a meetup to come and talk about that.
Right. So it's almost like it's that exponential thing of word of mouth peer pressure, right? Like y'all are here now, and so now you need to go pressure your peers that they should show up and be here. And it's more. It's almost a circular thing. How do you get more enterprises involved? You get more enterprises involved, but it's sort of like you get those few like initial people involved, and part of the ethos, which isn't necessarily something that a vendor would do necessarily in the open source world, but part of the approach that an enterprise should have when they enter the enterprise world is a large part of your mission is to get other people, peers of yours, involved as well. Like get your friends to come over.
Right. That a rising tide lifts all ships, and once you have two or three, kind of go out and set the standard for how it should be done and do it well.
Right.
Others will see that and say, hey, I want to be like that.
And we'll worry about differentiation up on the ship, not below the water.
Right. I mean, there's.
Go ahead. No. I was just gonna say one of the things that's apparent to me is we're really having a lot of fun talking to people about open source practices. Like, what are those practices you employ to participate in open source communities, but also kind of maintaining your own internal development, right? So how do you manage your teams? Who do you hire? Do you have people just working on open source, or just people working on the internal products, or do you have people doing both, right? How does that affect then how you market what you're doing? And like now, is it more of just trying to gain, what is it? What is your goal? Is it to gain attention about the project so you can then hire more people, or is it other? Or is it something else?
And different organizations are going to have different motivations for being involved in open source communities, but I think that's all part of it. It's part of being bigger, part of something that's bigger than yourself. It's attracting talent. It's about making the whole stack better, and it's fun to be involved in.
So William, take us then through like what you're planning to do over the next few months as you prepare to launch, this as an open source project. What are some of those things that you guys will be doing together, to make sure that this is done, right?
Yeah, so I think we sort of touched on it earlier when we were talking about, the captain's log.
Right.
Document what...
Captain's log.
Document our...
Aye.
How we started Hydrograph, why, our motivation, and also give sort of a roadmap that people are looking forward to, what we're planning to do with Hydrograph. So some of the plans we have coming up is releasing this officially, open source Hydrograph later this year, and basically getting some guidance from our open source office how to do that and what are the best practices. So incorporating those into what we have built already. And I think the beauty of Hydrograph is we're using it internally as well as open sourcing it. So we're not just doing it to open source, we're finding value ourselves using Hydrograph within our organization.
Not only the president, but also a client.
Pivotal does this, don't they?
Like use our own stuff?
Use your own stuff and
Sure.
open source your own stuff?
Yeah.
You gotta eat your own dog food.
There's lots of dog food moistened with champagne, just like the gravy train that goes on.
We had JFrog in earlier, and they said that they eat their own frog food.
Frog food. Oh, I see.
That's branding. But yeah, like we build our own an engine that orchestrates like our continuous delivery pipeline called Concourse, and we're like open source. It is open source, and we're productizing it, and so like that's an example of like a solving a problem that we had that like still becomes dog food we eat and then try to sell to people, or champagne that is bottled and also imbibed on our own. I don't know about frog food.
Frog food, it's another thing. Anyway, I guess you're eating bugs, right?
Sure.
Something.
Yeah, I mean, I've been reading the Time Machine recently, and you could be eating worse than dog food, champagne, and bugs.
Why?
Well, because they eat fruit and people in that movie or book. It's only like a 100-page book. But anyways, that's neither here nor there.
That is neither here nor there. Well, you guys, I want to thank you both for taking the time to talk with us. Interesting to follow the progress of Hydrograph and how it develops, and I look forward to kind of hearing that story, how you guys decide to market this and how you decide to like push this out into the community, because that then affects kind of it's an interesting kind of discussion about how that affects the rest of the organization too, like how it affects our perception of branding and and public relations and all that. So thanks for taking the time, really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you.
Capital One is our sponsor here at OSCON for a day of discussions about open source and why it is so important for new stack organizations everywhere. Capital One is at the forefront of this new open source world with several efforts such as the opening of its APIs and open sourcing core technology such as Hygieia, its DevOps dashboard. Learn more about Capital One and its focus on developers at developer.capitalone.com.